Welcome, welcome. It's good to be back. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Things change. This Camrose has 60 COVID cases, and we're kind of increasing up here, and things keep changing. And yeah, that'll be next week's question. How many COVID cases are there in your area? Yeah. So that kind of reminds me a little too much of our lockdown earlier this year. It's kind of weird. Uh, but yeah, from the Lower Mainland to Saskatchewan to Alberta, it's everywhere. Okay, and to Switzerland, right, Cyril? The A thought that I had. I'm so glad we're meeting together, and I was telling the leaders as well. Jason Kenney spoke yesterday at Alberta Premier, and did a good job reading letters from people about how it affects different people in different ways. And there's some people that are on the edge, near bankruptcy and just like that, like suicidal stuff is not that far away. And there's other people which like it's not really affecting them too much. And so we're all over the place. So, but in these times, it is so important to have your people. So our prayer is that in these discipleship groups, you're finding your people. You can come and just share even the dark thoughts going through your minds. You're like, I just need to say this out loud so I can tell how silly that thought is. And so as you meet, even though you never met people physically, Jesus is inviting you to see these people in your D group as your people tonight. Okay, they're your people. And Jesus is going to walk among you because he is here with me in this room, and he's with Lauren, he's with Wayne, he's with Sabrina, and he loves you so much. So just enjoy seeing how Jesus will show up in the highs and the lows. And we want to hear from him tonight. So last week, we're continuing to teach through the 5 mission practices. And the mission practice I covered last week was about hearing from Jesus. And hearing from Jesus, we hear from him in different ways, primarily through his word. That's the clearest place we hear him speak. But I also hear him when my brother or sister shares a story from their life of what God's doing there. And so we've got 3 people that are going to share a bit of their story of how they hear from Jesus. So Mackenzie, should we start off we're starting with Andrew, aren't we? Is that right?
I think so.
So let's, God bless you tonight, and we'll give it over to Andrew.
Okay. So I want to share a particular story that illustrates the way that I feel that God has communicated with me in a lot of situations in my life. I was serving it was 2009, and I was serving as associate pastor at Zion, now Hillside Lutheran Church in Cloverdale. And I was feeling a little bit run down, a lot bit run down. I was really trying to figure out what my purpose was and feeling a bit at a loss at that point in my ministry there. My daughter had just been born like a few months earlier, and I was trying to figure out what direction to take, but I was really feeling like I was just spinning my wheels and not getting where I needed to be. The year prior, I'd received 3 calls in fairly quick succession to other churches, but none of them felt very, at the time, none of them felt convenient, for lack of a better word. I mean, calls never come at a convenient time, but at the same time, they just didn't feel like it was the right timing, like it was the timing that God would have. And so one day I sat down with the senior pastor, and we were talking about some stuff and some longstanding things that had come up that I had dealt with as a pastor before he came, and then he was dealing with them. They were kind of coming back around again. And I finally just, I said, blurted out, I'm done. I can't do this anymore here. And this is really tough. And I feel a bit at a loss, and I don't know what to do. And about 10 minutes into this conversation, I'm having sort of this epiphany rather suddenly of what do I do now that, talking about putting things out in the open, right? Now it's out in the open, what's going to happen? And then, so 10 minutes into the conversation, my secretary rang through on the phone and said, hey, there's a call for you on the line. And so this is, while this has happened, first time I've admitted it out loud. And there's a call for you on the line. I think it's kind of important. I said, well, who is it? I'm kind of in the middle of something right now. And she said, it's a guy named Fred Schuning from Pincher Creek. And Pincher Creek was one of the 3 calls that I had received the year earlier. And at the time, I felt a really strong connection with the people in meeting with them, but didn't feel as though it was the right time. And Fred came on the line, and he was just as friendly as I remembered him from the year before. And he said, hey, you had mentioned at the time, and I always feel like it's important, if we want to hear from God, we got to leave the door open. I had said, if you're still vacant in a year, call me. And he said, first thing he said was, it's been a year, are you coming? And I said, your timing couldn't be better, right? And so he sent me the paperwork, and it was very whirlwind. It was very, very challenging for my wife and I to sort of feel like this was God's guidance, because you sort of would like to think God is convenient, in the sense of at least giving you some turnover time. But that's not really what happens. And so it seemed beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is where God wanted us to be. And so we moved to Pincher Creek, and it was a fantastic 10 years of ministry here. I think what that taught me primarily, and really the way that I try to hear the Lord now, is I want to have the humility to hear him. Because there are times when and it's funny because when you look at it, that's apparent throughout scriptures, the prophets and, guys like Jonah and David, God is speaking, and they sort of lack frankly, the humility to go, okay, let's do this. And I know that I struggle with that too. And so I want to have the humility to hear God speak. And as Dean said, he speaks through his word. But I think also too, what's become important in my life is that God speaks through people. He speaks clearly if we are expecting it. In order to hear God, you have to listen. And if we're not listening, we won't hear. And so there have been times where, like, I remember laying in the hospital bed in 2013, just after having my leg amputated, and I was alone, and the snow was falling outside in a massive snowstorm. And Chris Tomlin's song, Angel Army, I can't remember what the other name for it is, but the Angel Army song kind of came on my playlist. And, to feel a sense of, I need you, Lord, and to have such a direct response so fast in a song like that, where, I didn't put that on, I didn't change anything. God, I believe, brought that about. So yeah, I don't feel that there's coincidence when God speaks to us. There's not coincidence. There is no such thing as coincidence. If we think about someone and 2 days later we meet them, and hopefully I'm not the only one that's happened to, I believe that's God directing us to be with this person, to talk with this person, to share, and those things happen so frequently. And personally for me, I don't tend to feel like God is quiet. I tend to feel like God never stops talking. Because that's what he says he'll do. He'll be there with us daily. He'll support us. He'll give us what we need. And so that's a bit of my experience with hearing from God and hearing his voice in my life. The end.
Thanks, Andrew. Brandt, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandt. A little while ago, Kenzie asked if I would think about sharing how I've heard from God in my life, and it really kind of sparked, I guess, a whole trail, basically a journey in my life. When I was younger, I grew up kind of in the church and around Christianity. I never really would have said I heard from God, though. I was always, I guess, confused when, you'd hear people at church talk about, how God spoke to them or they saw God through the situation. And I guess I was never really perceptive to that growing up. To echo what Andrew said, I had to think about kind of, are we listening to God and are we actively seeking him if we're not hearing from him? Are we out there trying to find him in our everyday lives? So a Bible verse I kind of had to go along with that was John chapter 8, verse 47, which says, "Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason why you do not hear them is that you are not of God." So that verse kind of stood out to me, I think, because when I look back on my life now, I think in a lot of my teen years and things, I wasn't really looking for God or searching for him, which would explain why I didn't really perceive his presence in my life. The good news in that now is that I would say, looking back over my life, I can easily identify places where God has kind of guided me through situations and given me wisdom and coincidences that could have only come from him at the time, and I just didn't recognize them. So that's really cool to, I guess, identify and praise him for that work in my life now. So I guess given that, it had me thinking the last few weeks, how do we hear from God? At the end of the Great Commission in Matthew 28, Jesus says, "Behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So if God is always with us, how do we see him in every situation in our everyday lives? So I kind of compiled a little bit of a list, just a few stories and things that I've experienced, how I've experienced God speaking to me through just everyday life. So obviously a big one would be the Holy Spirit to start. When I was in Bible college, I remember sitting beside Mackenzie in Carrie Belt's class. I forget if I was maybe reading from a textbook or writing notes, and like just mid-sentence, I had this song lyric just pop off, like just not even pop off the page, just like be absolutely at the forefront of my mind, that it just stole 100% of my attention. So I was like, didn't really think much of it. I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. We take a break in like 25 minutes. I just open a random page in my Bible, and like the third verse that I get to is like that exact same song lyric again. So this kind of just like the song lyric just keeps popping up over and over again in my life for like the next few weeks, which, given the situation I was in, was actually really, I look at it as God just kind of giving me wisdom and faith to kind of just navigate a difficult situation that I wasn't really sure about. So God really showed me a lot of his provision and just wisdom and reassurance and faith through that experience. So that's one way I've experienced God speaking to me, through the Holy Spirit. Another one that really stood out to me when I look back over my life is how God is spoken through just the people that we interact with in our everyday lives. And talking with Kenzie, I wanted to come at it kind of specifically with stories I've got from just work. So kind of just being a farmer and buying and selling farm machinery. When I was 16, my dad and I went on a road trip. We had purchased some farm equipment from an individual in Alberta, somewhere near Drumheller. Anyway, we show up to this guy's place to pick up the things we ordered or bought, and this combine header we were supposed to be towing home, it wasn't quite ready yet to be picked up. He had the tires off it and was getting them changed, and my dad and I were kind of shocked because we had brought spare tires with us from home. It's just something that you do when you buy something sight unseen. You never know the condition it's going to be in. So we just said, we can put our tires on and kind of get out of your hair. It's not a big deal. And this guy that was selling the equipment specifically took the time to use it as an opportunity to share the gospel with us, which, I mean, we were Christians, but, he shared the golden rule, which was treat others as you would have them treated. So he said, the condition that this was in, I wouldn't have wanted to buy it the way it was. I don't think the tires would have got home. So I went into town and bought new tires for you guys so that it doesn't give you trouble. And just took the time to sit down and have probably a 15-minute conversation with me, just one-on-one, about just finding fulfillment in work and how God has created people to work and how we glorify him through the things that we do in our lives, and how there's just purpose and meaning in everything. And, there's more to life than money, and just all this wisdom that he had to impart in this short bit of time we had while we just happened to cross each other's paths was, advice that I still frequently remember to this day, and has honestly had an impact on my life. That this one guy that I just met in passing, took the time to just explain to some kid that he didn't have a clue who it was, just some of these life truths and lessons that he'd learned. I guess is really encouraging that he did that for me. So that's one way how I've been encouraged, just through a business interaction. And then this past year, I was kind of able to be on the other side of that conversation. I guess we had a guy over that is a family friend who sold his business, so was introducing the guy that was taking over. And so it was him and his son was with. So we kind of have coffee, introduce each other. It's small talk. They go to leave. And I think the subject of rec hockey came up, or something with COVID and sports. We got talking about hockey, and hockey turned to college. I mentioned I'd gone to Bible college. And this guy's son just mentioned that he was planning on going to Cape and Ray this fall, but with COVID and everything, he wasn't really able to, and was kind of really discouraged about the whole thing, and was curious about other Bible colleges. And, he wasn't really sure if he would like Bible college or what it was. So, I feel like God put him in my path at that time, that I could share my experience at CLBI with him, and just talk openly about Christianity and faith and the gospel, and really encourage him that, Bible college isn't a waste of time, as I think a lot of youth maybe perceive it to be. And that, just have someone from outside with no hidden ambition or other prior perspective in his life, just encourage him and tell him it was a good thing, I think really made a difference. And just kind of talking with him and his dad a little bit more later, they were really grateful that kind of happened when it did. So I see that as another opportunity, kind of being on the other side of the coin, where God used just kind of a business working relationship to further his kingdom and glorify his name through that. Some other ways that I've really experienced experienced God is through nature. I think this one's probably the easiest for me because I'm a really big outdoors person. But I remember talking with Mackenzie this summer, and it doesn't matter how just wound up or stressed out you can be, everything can go wrong in your day. But when you're just standing outside at night and you look up and you see all the stars in the sky, all your problems and things you're going through in life just seems so insignificant. It's kind of like a little kid that's kicking and screaming, and God's just got his hand on your forehead and is just slow down. I'm in control of everything here. Why are you worrying? We kind of discussed in our small group last week how worrying is not God's plan for us. And I think there's a lot of worry going on with COVID and just uncertainty, but ultimately that's not from God and not what God has in mind for us in our lives. So I think it's really important as Christians that we remember, I guess, how much God loves us, and that when we are feeling worried and anxious and stressed, that's not from him and it's not part of his plan, but that he's got something in mind that's so much better for us. And yeah, there's just a lot of encouragement in that for me anyway. And lastly, I was thinking another way that I've really experienced God in my life is just through provision. That's just come by, praying for wisdom and having situations unfold a certain way. There's numerous tangible examples I could think of, times where you've made an offer on something, and even if you didn't have the highest offer, yours is the offer that got accepted for whatever reason. So yeah, I've really experienced God's hand in life just through his provision too, and knowing that he has a plan and a will for me. And all it takes is the courage and faith to follow that. And his blessings are way more vast than we could ever imagine or even comprehend by, what we would think would make us just happy if you had, complete control over your life and could just kind of paint your dream. God's plan is always going to be way more satisfactory than that. So yeah, again, Matthew 28:20, the end of the Great Commission. God tells us to go make disciples of all nations and that he's with us to the end of the age. I find it really encouraging that because God is with us to the end of the age, it's easier for us to go and make disciples, which is kind of ultimately why we're here, is to encourage one another and grow in Christian community and make disciples that can make disciples. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Brandt. I got one more, and then guys will have a bit shorter time in your small groups, but that's all right.
Hey guys, my name's Cullen. I work here at COBI. Mackenzie asked me to share a bit about hearing God in my life. And so I thought, okay, what am I going to talk about? And then it hit me. I was like, oh yeah, coming to COBI as staff. I am an alumni. I did come here back in 06 to 08. But since then, I have not been at COBI. I've been back to Saskatchewan where I'm from. And then I moved to Alberta, married my wife Emily. And I've been in Alberta since 2010. But I haven't worked at COBI for very long. I started working here in 2018, so I've only been here for 2, and this is my 3rd school year that I'm a part of right now. But it's an interesting story because there's just so much about it that I didn't expect it to end here at COBI. But walk with me, will you? Let's go for a walk. So I graduated from COBI and I was in graphic design for a couple years. I graduated from that and I moved here to Alberta because my girlfriend at the time, Emily, was from Alberta. So I ended up here in the Edmonton area, and I was always in contact with COBI, helping out with graphic design and stuff, making cool stuff like that. Not bad. So I always stayed connected with COBI. There was always something about it that I wanted to help out with. I knew I had the tools and I knew I could do stuff that I could help out COBI with. I worked at a print shop for about 7 years in Edmonton, and it was fun. It was a new print shop actually, and they wanted a new graphic designer, so they didn't have to kind of break somebody out of their old habits. They wanted somebody new, and so that was me. And it was fun. I really enjoyed it. Even though it's stuff I really enjoyed, I love being creative and I love creating logos, business cards, brochures, signage for people. There was always that longing. There was always that part of me that kind of knew I might be doing some design and creative stuff in my life for God, but this isn't, I just have a feeling this isn't a long term place that I'm going to be. Even the city of Edmonton, me and my wife Emily, we would talk and neither of us felt that we were from Edmonton. When people ask, well, where are you from? We would say, well, we live in Edmonton. That's where we live, because she was from Stettler, I was from Saskatchewan, my family's from Regina area, but we were in Edmonton, and little by little I started helping out with COBI more and more, and I never really thought I'd actually be on staff. It was just kind of like a pipe dream that I had as a student, like, oh man, the staff is so cool, that'd be so awesome to work there. You get to do one-on-ones, go out for coffee with people, play worship. Oh, that stuff's so awesome. That's never gonna happen. But as things progressed, it was super interesting because it didn't happen in any way that I can give credit to myself. The way it happened was actually completely normal. I contacted Jeremy. He was on staff here, and he's like, okay, I need help with some shirts and stuff. Designs. Great. We've been doing that for a while. We know how it's done. And over time, I started talking to Jeremy, and I even said, Emily and I we'd love to be part of COBI in some way. It would be cool to help out with either some D groups or some volunteer things in the city, anything. We just wanted to be in and of the community of COBI. And he kind of said, well, why don't you come to COBI? Why don't you just come into town, come to Camrose and sit down with me and we'll talk about some stuff. So I was like, great, Jeremy wants to talk. How awesome is that? Woo woo. And so I got here and we started talking about design stuff, and he's like, how do you like your job? And I'm like, it's pretty good, I guess. Sort of, whatever, it's fun. And then he kind of casually slipped in the fact that he was no longer going to work at COBI. He was going to be a pastor at Res, at the church here, one of the churches here in town. Oh, that's pretty hard to compute in my head. So many people, they associate places and things with certain people, and COBI, it's like, oh man, Jeremy has always been at COBI for all I knew. It was like, oh man, Jeremy, no. And then he said, well, and it sounds like there might be some other changes too. So, keep an open mind sort of thing. And I was like, oh, okay, neat. Thanks, Jeremy. And so we kind of finished that up, and I went home, and it was just normal. Everything went back to normal. But then my wife and I, Emily, we were talking, and we're like, what about Camrose? That was always kind of on our list of like, oh man, we don't really belong. We're not from Edmonton. What about Camrose? Well, it'd be closer to her parents in Stettler, so grandparents for our kids. That would be great. A bunch of my really close personal friends are already in Camrose. That would be awesome. Yeah, to see them a lot more and more regularly. I don't know. It's like things started to turn, and we're like, maybe we should pray about this. And it's like the biggest warning I've ever heard in my life is careful what you pray for. Because God tends to work through that stuff. He wants to do things. And so we kind of just tossed it up there to God. We just sort of lofted it up, and we were genuinely, it was kind of like a continuous prayer. Not that when we said amen, it was over, but we knew that it was always on our hearts, and it was always kind of rattling around in our heads. God, if you're calling us to Camrose, and if you're calling us to COBI, please make it obvious Show us where to go. And if you want things to happen, open up the doors, God. Break open the opportunities. Show us clearly that you want us to be in Camrose. And if you want us to be at CLBI, that too. Show us. And I often pray that. I often pray, like, God, make it obvious. Please make it obvious to me. You know me, God. I don't operate well in the vague, in the concepts of interpreting certain things. Like, I'm a real black and white kind of dude in that regards. Like, show me. I'm so oblivious to so many things, especially with what God does. And so we accepted that would be our mindset. If God is wanting us to go to CLBI and Camrose, He will provide a way. He will show us where to go, and it will be it'll be obvious. And we went on living, and I actually ended up getting a phone call. I can't remember if it was a phone call or an email, but Dean was the president. And I had already kind of known him over the years. We've gone back and forth. And it was along the conversations of like, hey, Cullen, Jeremy mentioned you were wanting to be involved at CLBI somehow. There's actually some personnel change coming up this year that, I was wondering if we could just come and chat about that. Not a job interview. Let me emphasize, this was not a job interview. It was literally just like, hey, you want to be involved? Well, there's some stuff going down. Let's talk about that stuff going down. So we did. Dean came to our house in Edmonton, and we just kind of chatted, and he gave me the lowdown on staff that were leaving, and I was like, oh, man, that's brutal. Like, some of the staff that was leaving, like Jeremy and Dean was on staff, Dean Scrivens. It was like, oh, man. It was just like, what's CLBI without those guys? Oh, my gosh, they've been doing so many great things. And then it kind of came towards, the conversation turned a little bit towards like, well, what if you were on board? What if you were on staff? Stuff like that. And I don't know if we had the conversation a little bit prior or not, but that's when it hit me, when Dean was like in my living room at my house and Emily's sitting beside me. We're both listening to this. And in my head, I'm just like, what? Wait a second. Again, careful what you pray for. God, show me the way. Show me an obvious sign. Okay, now there's the president of an institution that is asking me, hey, what do you think about joining the staff? That is a very obvious situation. That sounds like an opportunity. So we chatted and we went back and forth, and over the course, I don't think it was very long, over the course of a week or two, maybe 3, it was like, wow, here's what it would look like for me to work at CLBI. And that's pretty much it. It's awesome, even though we wanted it. I don't think we got it because we want it. But God wanted this. And He's like, if you want me to show you, I'll show you. I will show you. So He did. He put Dean in my house. He put the season of the staff their season at CLBI, they came to an end and went into other things. It just lined up. It was unbelievable. And in my head, I've always been like, wow, that's so lucky. And I've reflected on being lucky over the years. And I'm like, no, it's definitely a God thing. And then, so we're like, great, we're going to work at CLBI. We own our house in Edmonton. We got to sell this sucker, and we got to pick up a new house. And school's starting, and I got to be there in like August ahead of time so that I can prepare for the students and my job. God, again, if this is your jam, please pave the way, God. And we found a house. Imagine that. Found a house. It was exactly what we wanted in the area that we were hoping. Bing, bang, boom. We even stayed at CLBI in the dorms for 4 days, I believe, which sounds like might be like a rite of passage for some of the staff. But we stayed in the dorms until we got our house, moved in. We're here in Camrose in COBI over the course of it was 3 or 4 months. All this had changed. And I was just like, this is a lot of change in a relatively short amount of time. But what I kept going back to, what keeps coming back to me, certainly now, retrospectively, the amount of peace we had with everything. We were just so understanding, and we knew that it was God. I knew it was God. There was no doubt about it. It wasn't just our own decisions that were driving this, because we knew that if there was no position at CLBI, I would not be able to work here. I know that if we couldn't find a house, maybe this is hard for a reason. That could be. Maybe that's not where we're supposed to be. But with each decision that we made, we could have easily been stressed out. There's a lot to stress out over. Buying a home is crazy business. And getting a new job is like, oh my gosh, all the paperwork. And is this really where I want to spend the next few years? But with every step, we just knew the peace. That peace, it's like it was inevitable. It was going to happen no matter what. And so it was pretty awesome to be a part of that. And it was funny because we didn't really notice it at the time. But it was totally God, and it was so peace-driven that nothing was done haphazardly, nothing was scary, and we weren't really uncertain about any of it because it was like deep down we had a genuine peace about all the decisions that were being made because, yeah, it was so God, it wasn't even funny. And one phrase that has come to my mind, I've explained it to a bunch of friends recently, is God's up in heaven, and he's like, oh, hey, hold my beer. Check this out. And then he just does something totally nuts. And I'm the product of God doing something totally nuts. And so that's a little glimpse into my experience of hearing God speak in my life. And I think it was quite clear that he was up to something, as Ted likes to put it. and that there can be so many different ways that seem normal. You know, why was I always in communication with the staff at CLBI? Yeah, there was the graphic design and the clothes and the merch and stuff. But perhaps it was deeper than that. Maybe they wanted somebody who was already part of the community, sort of. Alumni is always cool to have on staff. Sorry, Kate. But yeah, there were so many little things like that it was just like, this is a very, very God thing to do. And I'm glad to be a product of what he's doing. And it's funny because being a part of a Scandinavian Lutheran family, we never really talked about certain things as far as like, whoa, what's God calling you in your life? Like, was God speaking to you today? Stuff like that. It was a little bit more reserved than that typically. But now that I look back, it's like, even though I necessarily didn't know it was God speaking to me at that time, I can confidently say that there's been so many times and so many instances that that God has led me through, and that God has called me to, even though I thought it was just me or my conscience or my friends or whatever. So it's funny having this big instance happen and looking back and being like, oh yeah, no, you've been doing that for a long time, God. I'm just finally getting up to speed with what you've been doing. So that's a little glimpse into my experience. I hope that's good enough for you, Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you for you three for sharing just different ways how God has spoken into our lives and how Jesus gets our attention. He is very playful. He's very caring. He's surprising, and he's God. It shows up in different ways. Thanks, everyone. So I think with that, I think we'll send everyone into their D groups. God bless you and have a wonderful week, everyone.